Why do people sometimes adopt the worldview of a radio host, television personality, podcaster, political commentator, or charismatic public figure so completely that criticism of the person's ideas feels like a personal attack? The phenomenon is bigger than politics. It can happen with religion, economics, health, psychology, investing, and virtually any subject where a charismatic personality becomes a trusted source of information. Consider two financial personalities, Dave Ramsey and Robert Kiyosaki. Their approaches to debt illustrate the difference particularly well. Ramsey emphasizes eliminating debt, living within one's means, and building wealth through discipline and savings. Kiyosaki has emphasized financial education, assets, and the strategic use of leverage, particularly in real estate. Both approaches contain legitimate insights and risks, and neither should be treated as universally applicable. But the psychologically interesting question isn't which philosophy is correct. It is why people become emotionally attached to one philosophy in the first place. The personality comes first. Most people don't begin by consciously deciding to adopt an entire ideology. They begin by liking a person. The person sounds confident. They speak with authority. They appear knowledgeable. They tell entertaining stories. They seem morally certain. They say things that confirm what the listener already suspects. Repeated exposure creates familiarity, and familiarity can create trust. A listener may eventually stop thinking, "Dave Ramsey says this," and start thinking, "This is simply how things are." That distinction is enormously important. The personality has disappeared behind the belief. The parasocial relationship. Psychologists Donald Horton and Richard Wall described this phenomenon in the 1950s with the concept of the parasocial relationship. A person can develop a sense of relationship with someone they encounter through television, radio, or other media despite never meeting them. Think about what happens with a daily radio personality. You hear the person's voice while driving to work. You hear their jokes, their frustrations, their stories, their opinions, and their moral judgments. Eventually, the voice becomes familiar. The listener may begin to feel that they know the host. But the relationship is fundamentally one-sided. This creates an unusual form of authority, the authority of someone who feels like a friend. Confidence can become evidence. Robert Cialdini's work on influence helps explain another part of the phenomenon: authority and social proof. Human beings cannot personally investigate every claim they encounter. We therefore rely on shortcuts. If someone appears knowledgeable, confident, and successful, we are more likely to accept what they say. But confidence is not the same thing as accuracy. A hesitant expert discussing probabilities can feel less convincing than a charismatic personality delivering an absolute answer. The emotional experience of certainty can become confused with evidence. This is particularly powerful in subjects like economics and investing, where uncertainty is unavoidable. The person who says, "It depends," can sound weak. The person who says, "Here's what you need to do," can sound like a leader. From authority to identity. Henri Tachful and John Turner provide another important piece through social identity theory. People don't merely belong to groups. Group membership can become part of their identity. That means a financial philosophy can eventually become more than a financial philosophy. Imagine the progression. I listen to Dave Ramsey. Then, I follow Dave Ramsey's principles. Then, people like us believe in financial responsibility. Eventually, people who disagree with us are irresponsible. The argument has changed. It is no longer simply about money. It has become a distinction between good people and bad people, responsible people and irresponsible people, disciplined people and foolish people. Once an idea becomes morally charged, contradictory evidence becomes much harder to accept. The debt-free ritual. This is why something like the famous debt-free celebration is psychologically fascinating. The caller isn't simply reporting a financial outcome. There is a narrative. Debt, sacrifice, discipline, struggle, victory, recognition. The public celebration reinforces the identity of the successful follower. The person has followed the philosophy, endured the prescribed hardship, and received approval from the authority figure and the community surrounding that authority. The emotional reward can therefore become attached to the ideology itself. The philosophy isn't merely something the person believes. It becomes something the person experienced. The blinder effect. This is where the concept of moral superiority becomes especially important. Suppose someone believes that eliminating debt is inherently virtuous. Now introduce an argument that, under certain circumstances, carefully managed leverage could produce greater wealth. The person may not process that argument as a neutral financial proposition. Instead, they may unconsciously hear, "Irresponsible people are smarter than responsible people." The financial argument has become a threat to identity. This is one reason people can develop what might be called a psychological blinder. Information that confirms the worldview is welcomed. Information that threatens it is scrutinized, ridiculed, rejected, or simply ignored. The problem isn't necessarily intelligence. It is that the brain is now protecting something more valuable than a proposition. It is protecting identity and belonging. Solomon Asch and the power of the crowd. Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments demonstrated how strongly people can be influenced by group consensus, even when the correct answer is obvious. Humans are social creatures. Disagreement carries psychological costs. When thousands of people appear to agree with a charismatic personality, the individual listener receives another powerful message. Everyone else sees it this way. Social proof reinforces authority. Authority reinforces conformity. Conformity reinforces identity. And identity reinforces the authority. A feedback loop develops. Milgram, more than blind obedience. Stanley Milgram's obedience research is often summarized as demonstrating that ordinary people will obey authority. But later interpretations have emphasized something more complicated. People can become psychologically engaged with the authority's mission. That distinction matters. The most powerful follower may not think, "I'm obeying this person." They may think, "This person is right, and I'm helping accomplish something good." That is a much stronger form of influence. It transforms obedience into participation. When followers become defenders. Irving Janis's concept of groupthink adds another dimension. When maintaining group agreement becomes more important than examining competing evidence, critical thinking can deteriorate. The group begins defending its conclusions rather than testing them. At that point, the leader doesn't have to personally silence every critic. The followers can do it for him. They correct each other. They ridicule outsiders. They repeat the group's vocabulary. They defend the group's heroes. Eventually, the ideology can reproduce itself without the original authority having to do very much at all. The real question. This doesn't mean every fan of a radio host is brainwashed, nor does it mean every strong ideological community is a cult. There is a spectrum. Audience-fan parasocial relationship, ideological identification group identity, epistemic dependence. The final stage is the most concerning. That is when a person stops asking, "Is this claim true?" and starts asking, "What does my guy say about it?" The messenger has become the filter through which reality itself is interpreted. And that may be the deeper psychological lesson. The greatest influence isn't necessarily the ability to tell people what to think. It is the ability to become the person they trust to tell them what to think about everything else. When authority, certainty, morality, belonging, and personality become fused together, challenging an idea can feel like challenging the person's identity. At that point, the argument is no longer really about money, politics, religion, or economics. It is about who we are, and which voices we have allowed to become part of ourselves.
Mr. Lee, is this you talking or the Randy?